The 70s were the prime era for bikes. Engines got bigger, colors got louder, and there were no rules to hold them back. From British triples to Italian exotics and Japan's new breed of inline-fours, every factory was chasing one thing: speed. These are the 15 fastest 1970s motorcycles ever made. Starting with the Triumph Trident T160. If the 70s had a soundtrack, the T160's triple would be on vinyl. Raspy, mechanical, a little imperfect, and fast enough to make your open-face lid whistle. In 1975, Triumph finally gave the Trident the updates it always deserved. Electric start, left foot shift, a 5-speed gearbox, and a rear disc. Out on a test strip, journalists clocked it at a mean 119.5 miles per hour, with a few runs brushing 125. Brochures were modest, but the road told the truth. On paper, it sounds tame, about 58 brake horsepower at 7,250 revolutions per minute from a 744cc OHV triple. But the way it delivers that power is pure 1970s magic. Tall gearing, fat mid-range, and a bit of over-rev when the road stretches ahead. The quarter mile came in around 12.7 seconds at 106 miles per hour, which was properly quick for a roadster on bias-ply tires and old-school suspension. It went beyond fast. You could feel the carburetors breathe, the engine thrum rise and fall, and the whole bike settle into a confident lope at 3 figures. Of course, it was still the 70s. Narrow tires, real wind blast, and brake fade if you got carried away. But what made the T160 special was how composed it felt at speed. It didn't brag much. It was just smooth. Up next is the Benelli 750 Se. 6 pipes, 6 pistons, and a soundtrack that turned every cafe car park into a concert. The Benelli 750 Se was fast for a Benelli and for the decade. It was the world's first production 6-cylinder motorcycle you could actually buy. In stock form, it made about 76 horsepower at 9,000 revolutions per minute from a 747cc inline-6, good for roughly 200 to 204 kilometers per hour, or 124 to 127 miles per hour. Period testers loved its smoothness between 35 and 90 miles per hour. Top Gear acted like a mild overdrive, so you needed real road to let it breathe. Some testers recorded low 13-second quarters with a hint of wheel spin and guessed that better tires could help it sneak into the 12 seconds. The rear drum faded under pressure, but the twin front discs held their ground. Although most Se's high speed on a regular day was around 127 miles per hour, one crazy stock Se went as high as 138 miles per hour in 1977 with the help of a tailwind and tall gearing. From the saddle, the Se was the 70s itself. Narrow bias, ply tires humming, 6 Delortos gulping air through Y manifolds, and ground clearance that ran out before the revs did. It wasn't the quickest from the lights, but at speed it felt like velvet. That blend of genuine ton-plus performance and mechanical spectacle earns the 750 Se its place among the fastest bikes of the 70s. Number 13. Ducati 900 Supersport. Open-face lid, silver and blue fairing in your mirrors, and that bevel drive twin thrumming through the bars was what fast felt like in the mid-70s. The first-generation 900 Supersport took Ducati's race-bred 750 formula, stretched it to 864cc, and gave the Desmodromic L-twin a longer stride for the road. It was quite fast for its time. The square-case L-twin made roughly 68 horsepower at the wheel, enough to push the bike to around 135 miles per hour, or 217 kilometers per hour, which was serious pace for its day. Quarter-mile runs in the mid 1-2 second range confirmed it could hang with anything on the road, but numbers missed the point. What made the 900 SS special was the way it delivered that speed. It came alive above the mid-range, those big Delortos gulping air, the exhaust hardening into a metallic snarl as the tatch climbed. You crouched low behind the half-fairing, the chassis light but steady, feeling the front float just a whisper. It still carried the limits of the era though. The narrow tires, simple discs, and the need for a light touch at speed held it down a bit, but the ride still felt pretty clean for the 70s. And that's what places this Ducati in the league of the fastest. It had the numbers and made them usable. Then, we have the Kawasaki Z1R. This was the moment the 1970s swapped chrome for edges. The Z1R took Kawasaki's big DOHC4 and dressed it for the disco decade. Angular fairing, shorter bars, drilled twin discs, and a tank that looked carved from metal. It was attitude on wheels, and more importantly, it had the performance to match the look. In stock form, the Z1R was properly fast. Period tests recorded between 132 and 137 miles per hour, with quarter-mile times ranging from 12.4 seconds at 110 miles per hour to as quick as 11.9 inches ideal hands. And in 1978, that put it shoulder to shoulder with the CBX and XS11, the kings of the leader bike wars. Beneath the bodywork sat a 1015cc air-cooled inline-four, making roughly 90 horsepower at 8,000 revolutions per minute through a 5-speed box. On the road, it felt unmistakably 1970s. Bias ply tires humming, long 58.7-inch wheelbase keeping it planted, triple discs that were strong once, softer the next. The half fairing earned its keep once you hit the ton, carving a pocket of calm while the chassis asked for smooth, deliberate hands. And then came the legend. When magazines started drag racing the new litter bikes, Kawasaki USA doubled down with the Z1 RTC. This was a dealer turbo special capable of 10-second quarters and speeds of over 150 miles per hour, as reported in period coverage. But even without a blower, the stock Z1R stands tall in the decade's Fast Bike Hall of Fame. Moving on, the Kawasaki Z1900 or KZ900. This was the machine that put the super in Superbike. Kawasaki's Z1 changed what fast meant on the street. The big 903cc DOHC4 would idle through traffic, then howl past the ton like it was bored doing it. In 1973, Cycle World ran a 12.61-second quarter at 105.6 miles per hour and clocked 120 miles per hour on a short radar stretch, noting they'd likely run out of road before the engine did. Out in the wild, verified top speeds around 130 to 132 miles per hour, or about 210 kilometers per hour, became legend. On paper, it was straightforward. About 82 horsepower at 8,500 revolutions per minute, a 5-speed box, 8.7-inch wheelbase, and 4 Mikuni carbs feeding an engine that loved to rev but still pulled from idle, something few bikes of its era could claim. Up front sat a single 11.5-inch disc, with some markets offering a second, and out back, a big 7.9-inch drum. On bias ply tires and twin shocks, it stayed true if you were smooth, and punished you if you weren't. At speed, the experience was raw but honest. That long chassis settled into stride around 100 miles per hour, the air thick in your chest, the intake growl turning sharp at 7 grand. Later tests of near-stock KZ900S repeated the magic, mid-12 seconds in the quarter and 125 to 127 miles per hour flat out. At number 10, we have MV Agusta 750 seconds America. Late 1970s, MV Agusta brought a shimmer of red and silver paint, 4 chrome megaphones gleaming under sunlight, and an exhaust note that could stop conversations. This was the 750 seconds America, a motorcycle that fused art, racing heritage, and genuine speed into one of the most desirable machines of its era. Under the skin was a 789cc DOHC inline-four, breathing through 4 Del Orto carbs and producing about 75 horsepower at 8,500 revolutions per minute. It shared DNA with MV's Grand Prix winners, right down to its hand-built precision. Power went through a 5-speed box and a shaft final drive, with twin 280mm front discs and a rear drum. Later, a disc from 1976. This was serious engineering, dressed in pure Italian elegance. Performance matched the promise. Strong examples recorded true top speeds around 210 kilometers per hour, or about 130 miles per hour, while classic mechanics measured 119 to 120 miles per hour on a 1,000-yard run. Cycle's 13-second quarter mile at 105 miles per hour told the same story. Tall gearing, long legs, and an appetite for open roads. From the saddle, it felt like speed redefined. About 240 kilos dry gave it stability, while the smooth, rev-happy Ford delivered its pace with an effortless surge. The narrow tires sang, the fairing cut the wind, and everything felt perfectly in sync if you rode it right. Next up is the Moto Guzzi 850 Le Mans Mark I. This bike was mid-70s Italy in one piece. Del Orto's gulping air, 4 megaphones flashing in your mirrors, and that long-legged shaft-drive twin rolling past the ton with unhurried authority. The first Le Mans was an endurance racer with lights, built for riders who preferred long straights and late nights. Underneath the bodywork sat an 844cc OHV V-twin, good for roughly 71 to 80 horsepower depending on tune. Power is fed through a 5-speed gearbox and a shaft final drive, with twin front discs and, depending on year, a rear drum or disc. In period testing, top speeds landed between 129 and 135 miles per hour, or 208 to 217 kilometers per hour. Motorcycle Classics logged 133.5 miles per hour in 1977, and Cycle World's later retrospective confirmed similar numbers with quarter-mile times in the high 12 seconds. From the saddle, it felt deliberate, almost serene. Crouch behind the bikini fairing, let the revs clear, and the Big Goozy turned into a lane 3 Express. Contemporary tests and retros alike showed 12.6 to 13.1 seconds at 103 to 105 miles per hour for the standing quarter. It wasn't the quickest of 76, but it was fast where it mattered, and that was on real road and in high gear. It proved its prowess to the fullest. Of course, the era showed through. Repeated hard stops could glaze the pads, and a heavy hand on rough pavement brought polite warnings through the bars. But given space, the Le Mans gave authentic 130 miles per hour class performance with the composure of an endurance racer. At number 8, Italy brings in Benelli 900 Se. Stretching the original 750 Se to 906 cc, Benelli claimed around 80 horsepower at 8,400 revolutions per minute from its SOHC inline-6, fed by 3 Delortos. Power went through a 5-speed gearbox and chain final drive, with twin front discs and, on later bikes, a rear disc to match. By the numbers, a healthy example topped out near 193 kilometers per hour, or about 120 miles per hour, placing the 900 Se solidly in the fast lane for the late 70s. But the Se's real story was how it made that speed. It built momentum with turbine smoothness, the exhaust metallic wail climbing note by note. Road testers of the time noted its uncanny balance, compact, civilized, and deceptively easy to ride next to its 6-cylinder rivals. That composure made it dangerously tempting to keep it pinned. On the strip, credible figures hovered around the low 13 seconds in the quarter mile at just under 100 miles per hour. You still felt the 70s under you though. Narrow bias ply tires, braking fade if you push too hard, and a chassis that demanded smoothness over rough tarmac. Treat it right, and the Se delivered what few bikes could. Continental speed, high-speed poise, and one of the most intoxicating engine notes ever recorded on asphalt. Number 7. Suzuki GS1000. In a decade that invented the word superbike, Suzuki did an excellent job. Suzuki's first litter bike took the balance and civility of the GS750 and turned everything up. Testers proved it in 1978, hitting 11.83 seconds at 112 miles per hour in the quarter mile, with most other runs sitting in the low 12 seconds. In showroom trim, it lived in the 135 to 137 miles per hour range, or 217 to 221 kilometers per hour, right beside the fastest bikes of the decade. Factory numbers quoted 87 to 90 horsepower from the 997cc inline-4, and every bit of it felt usable. The GS didn't need theatrics to go fast. It built speed cleanly with a long 58.7-inch wheelbase, steady steel frame, and throttle response that felt progressive rather than explosive. Twin front discs and a single rear gave confident, if period correct, braking. Strong early, then fading politely to remind you it was still the 70s. On bias ply rubber, you learn to pick a line, stay light on the bars, and let the engine sing past 7,000 revolutions per minute. What made the GS1000 special was mainly its composure. It could do 130 plus miles per hour all day without protest, the kind of speed you could live with rather than survive. Up next is the Yamaha XS1100. If the 70s had a king of the straight line, this was it. Yamaha's first Leader 4 arrived swinging 1,101cc 4 Mikunis and a shaft drive that turned roll-ons into parlor tricks. In Cycle World's 1978 test, a bone stock XS11 ripped the quarter in 11.78 seconds at 114 miles per hour and pulled an honest 135 miles per hour or 217 kilometers per hour up top. That was serious velocity in an open-face lid. with bias plies humming and the speedo sweeping past the ton like nothing. On paper, it seems civilized at around 95 horsepower at 8,000 revolutions per minute and 66.5 pounds-feet at 6,500, but the way it made speed was the revelation. Long gearing, fat torque, and a rock-solid motor meant you could be loafing at 70, breathe on the throttle, and find yourself deep in triple digits before your brain caught up. In-gear roll-ons were its party trick. Testers wrote again and again about how effortlessly it demolished passing zone. At roughly 603 pounds wet and stretched over a 60-inch wheelbase, the XS1100 was no scalpel in the corners. Twin front discs were stout for the time, but repeated stops would fade, and heavy hands met gentle reminders from the chassis. Still, for sheer, repeatable highway pace, nothing from the era came close. The next fast bike is the Ducati 750 Supersport green frame. The 750 Supersport was Ducati's first true halo bike, a direct descendant of the 1972 Imola winner. Built in limited numbers, it carried the same race DNA, refined just enough to survive traffic lights. The Desmodromic 748cc L-twin made about 72 horsepower at 9,500 revolutions per minute, good for roughly 220 kilometers per hour or about 137 miles per hour. Dry weight hovered near 187 kilograms, and early bikes used twin front discs with a rear drum. Now those numbers not only sounded fast, but were very fast, especially on skinny bias ply tires and mid-70s brakes. Period testers and collectors quote top speeds between 135 and 140 miles per hour, with a few blue sky examples reportedly brushing 143. What you felt from the seat was far richer than the stats. As the big Del Ordo 40 seconds cleared their throats, the motor smoothed, and the attach needle swept through the upper third, the bike transformed to something alive, taut, and beautifully mechanical. Behind the small fairing, every extra revolution per minute felt like found velocity, but it demanded finesse. Ride it loose at 120 miles per hour, and the chassis would give you a warning but keep your inputs clean, and it felt sculpted for speed. Number 4. Honda CB900F. By the end of the 70s, Honda had its swagger back. At first glance, the CB900F looked like just another sensible UJM. Flat bars, twin shocks, understated lines. But when you twist the throttle, the Big Four transformed A-roads into runways. The first versions began production in 1979. Honda's 901cc DOHC inline-four made a quoted 95 brake horsepower at 9,000 revolutions per minute, channeled through four 32mm Mikunis and long, relaxed gearing. Cycle World's period testing nailed the numbers. 12.09 seconds at 110.5 miles per hour in the quarter, and an honest 132 miles per hour flat out. Honda's own figures suggested 11.7 seconds and 131 miles per hour. And for once, factory optimism met reality. Real-world runs consistently put the CB900F in the 130 to 135 miles per hour bracket, which was solid top-tier speed at the decade's close. The difference was how usable that pace felt. The GS1000 and XS11 might have been brawnier, but the CB900F was the refined one. It was balanced, predictable, with a chassis that rewarded smooth hands. Twin front discs and a strong cradle frame kept it stable, though hard braking could still fade as the miles piled on. At the ton, the intake howl built into a mechanical harmony, the kind of sound that felt engineered rather than improvised. Wind roar, carburetor breath, the steady surge of a motor that never felt strain. The CB900F might not have been the strip bully every day, but as a genuine 130+ miles per hour street bike with composure, it deserves to be recognized. Still with Honda, we have the Honda CBX 1000. When Honda launched the CBX in 1978, it was building more than another superbike. It was making a statement. The 1047cc DOHC inline-6 gave pure power. Early tests had the CBX tearing through the quarter in the low 11 seconds, with Cycle World clocking 11.55 seconds at around 117 miles per hour, and topping out between 134 and 140 miles per hour, depending on gearing and courage. For a street-legal bike in the late 70s, that was near mythic. What you felt from the seat was surged with civility. The engine spun cleanly past 9,000 revolutions per minute, fed by a wall of 6 Mikunis, and built speed with a smoothness few bikes could touch. Crack it open at 70, and the CBX simply erased distance. Reviewers couldn't stop talking about its roll-on thrust and turbine-like character. The chassis was pure period art, twin shocks, long wheelbase, twin front discs, and a rear disc for good measure. On bias-ply tires, it wanted smooth hands. So, if you rode it tidy and it tracked like a train, but if you hammered the brakes too long, the Fade Fairy reminded you this was still the 1970s. Beyond the numbers, the CBX's legend comes from what it represented. It was the first production motorcycle mini magazines ever clocked past 130 miles per hour. Later versions grew softer, but the original CBX remained the headline act. Another Japanese speed demon is the Kawasaki Z1300 or KZ1300. When the 70s ended, Kawasaki showed up to the superbike fight with a masterpiece. The Z1300 was a statement piece, a liquid-cooled DOHC inline, 6 with shaft drive and the composure of a grand tourer that just happened to be brutally fast. Its 1,286cc engine was rated around 120 horsepower and 85 pounds-feet of torque, numbers that still sound impressive today. Cycle World clocked a stock bike at 11.9, 3 seconds and 114.8 miles per hour through the quarter, with a 138 miles per hour top speed in road tests, but other period figures rounded to an even 140 miles per hour. For the late 70s, that was near the ceiling of street-legal performance. At about 314 kilograms wet, or about 692 pounds, it was a heavyweight, but one that tracked like it was on rails, the shaft drive keeping everything calm while the speedo crept past 200 kilometers per hour. Triple discs gave serious stopping power for the day, but repeated hard braking could still fade, reminding you that this was still a 70s bike. Against the howling CBX and Benelli's exotic sixes, the Kawasaki was the quiet bruiser. It was the end of the decade's horsepower war and the beginning of true high-speed touring. Finally, we have the Laverda Jota 1000. If one bike bottled the late 70s fast with attitude vibe, it was the Laverda Jota with its long tank, low bars, and a 3-cylinder bellow that made every cafe car park fall silent. Born from Slater Brothers' hot rod vision and Laverda's 981cc DOHC triple, the early Jotas used a 180-degree crank and big carbs to squeeze around 90 horsepower at 7,600 revolutions per minute. It delivered insane speed powered by a very serious engine. So, how fast was this bike? Cycle World called it a 140 miles per hour road rocket in 1977, and they weren't exaggerating. Credible tests and retros keep it in the 138 to 140 miles per hour, or about 225 kilometers per hour zone, with classic mechanics logging 139.8 miles per hour with a tailwind. Quarter-mile figures hovered around 12.8 seconds at roughly 107 miles per hour, and for a road-going triple on bias-ply tires, those were elite numbers. From the saddle, the Jota felt like raw speed forged in steel. A tall first gear, long legs and top, and a dry weight between 234 and 246 kilos gave it both muscle and manners. Twin front discs provided stout braking for the time, though repeated stops could still fade, and the narrow tires rewarded tidy, deliberate inputs over heroic. Despite these era limitations, the bike's speed still peaked. Which other bike deserves a spot on this list? Drop it in the comments, and if you enjoyed the ride, subscribe for more bike videos.